So if you like depictions of girlhood, especially in the modern day, and being a teenager in the modern day, if you like the ethics of true crime and talking about that, if you just want to read a fictional murder book and want to know the details, then this book is for you. Hello and welcome back to my book channel, and if you did not know, my name is Robin and this is a gay book channel, so if that sounds like your sort of thing, click the describe button. I can describe what the channel is like for you, or you can click the subscribe button, even better, and the like if that is your sort of thing. And if you can't tell, I may have been in a little bit of a book slump, but that has all changed since I have read this book. This is Penance by Eliza Clark. I read both of Eliza Clark's books in July and it's nearly the end of August now. It's been a while. But I read Boy Parts first and this was extremely incredible. I have not read any Eliza Clark beforehand. It was the first time I've ever read her book. So I read this first and a couple of days later I was looking on my audiobook app and Penance popped up and it was by Eliza Clark and I really enjoyed Boy Parts, so I thought why not give it a go. I enjoyed it so much I bought a copy, which is very rare for me, but I am so happy to have this in my hands. And this is such an incredible book and I really wanted to do a review about this book because I can't stop thinking about this book, and like I said, it's been practically almost a month now since I've read it, and this may be one of the best books I have read of all time, definitely this year, and it's definitely in my top favourite books, like top 5 favourite books. So let's dive into why this book is so incredible. Penance is a fake true crime book that is written by a disgraced journalist called Alex Z. Corelli, and he is the author of this book. Inside the book, he is the author of the book inside this book. This book follows the murder of Joan Wilson. Joan is a teenager who was murdered by 3 of her classmates, and they all live in this small fictional town called Crow-on-Sea, which is like a small seaside town. The business isn't booming anymore over there, and so it is just a small quiet seaside town where not a lot is happening basically. Joan was murdered by her 3 classmates, like I said, and their names are Violet, Dolly and Angelica. This book is a collection of podcast posts, texts, Tumblr posts, Discord messages, fan fiction. There is so much in this book and it is set out so incredibly well. We get different information from a wide variety of different sources. The very first page of this book tells us that this book has been taken off of shelves and is now being republished, but it has a warning that Alex Z. Corelli has possibly fabricated and misrepresented words from the interviewees and has possibly fabricated things that happened during the murder and during the lead up to the murder. Take your reading with a pinch of salt basically. We soon get to find out a bit of information about Alex Corelli, and we find out that he is a disgraced journalist and he was cancelled because back in the day when he was a journalist he was involved in a phone hacking scandal which led to him being fired. After this he turned to writing true crime novels. He finds some success in his first couple of novels, but then people begin realising who he is and what he got caught up in, and slowly the releases of his book face criticism and he doesn't particularly do very well with any of the books he comes out after the fact. This book is his next writing venture, and this murder is not a very well known murder as it happened on the night of Brexit, which was a massive night, and so it never got covered. After this forewarning page we just dive straight into Joan's murder and it is horrific. We find out the events that happened during the night and happened just after the events as well, and this section of the book is so clever and so haunting and it really sticks with you for a long time after. It is genuinely so difficult to read, and we find out that Joan was kidnapped, tortured, and then she was burned alive by her 3 classmates, and it is incredibly detailed. It's really difficult to again read and to get past, and it's the very first chapter that you are dealt with as well. I do find this like super clever and interesting because I went to a Q&A with Eliza Clark and she talked about this book, and she talked about how when you listen to true crime from podcasts or like videos, they only talk about the crime itself and they never really go into any of the details from anything else. And so this book just hits you with the crime and you are told exactly what happens, and then the rest of the book is giving you details about every single murderer, the climate of what Crowansea is, the families of these people. It just builds up the characters and it tells you, I'll say, obviously it's with a pinch of salt, but it tells you exactly why these girls did what they did. And it gives you the background and the information, and it even gives you the history of the town, and it builds this, it's really incredible, like, I would say world building, but it's really incredibly written. To be warned, if you're going to pick this book up, it is a very, very heavy first chapter. We find out that Alec Corelli has been staying inside Crowansea, and that's why you get so much history and like in-depth analysis about the town itself. It's incredibly written, again, all the way through, and it gives such a clear place of where this is. Like, as someone who lives in the UK, like, I know this town. The rest of the book is just finding out the contributing factors to why these teenagers did what they did. But as we find out, Alex Z. Corelli might not be telling the whole truth, and so it is very difficult to differentiate between what could be actual fact and what could just be something he has made up. After the recap of the murder, we then get to know the murderers one by one. They have a lot of pages dedicated to every individual murderer, so you get to find out their background, you get to find out who they are, you get to find out literally everything about the murderers. Angelica is your classic bully type. She's written as like a classic bully type, but deep down she actually has a lot going on behind doors. We find out that her best friend died tragically in a water park accident, and it, again, a really disturbing scene to read, but we then find out that Angelica has not dealt with this well at all, and Angelica also talks to herself, or talks to the ghost of her best friend, and she believes in ghosts and spiritual things, and it's a lot. Especially this happens to Angelica when she's in year 6, which is just before high school years, and I don't think she gets any therapy or anything like that, so she never gets any true output to dealing with this situation. But we find out that that was a massive event that happened to her. We also find out that Angelica's father is, he's a rich guy. He owns like the majority of properties in Crowansea. He owns the cabins that Joni was killed and burnt in as well. We also find out that he's part of which is in the UK, a far-right group called UKIP, and he's a politician that works with that party. He also has a friend who is dead that is sort of like a Jimmy Savile type, and I'm not going to go into any detail about that, but he defends him quite heavily, and of course all of this gives Angelica massive backlash at school, and she's heavily bullied for all of these things. We find out a lot about Angelica, her history, her family. We find out a lot about her, and again, what makes these people into the people that could kill someone, basically. We get a look into Dolly, who is the second murderer. We find out that Dolly has a very tragic past, and it's and we also find out that like her mother is an ex-alcoholic and she's now a devout Christian. Dolly has an entire Tumblr dedicated to a fake here, but in the book real, school shooting like massacre. She has an entire Tumblr and fan fiction dedicated to the 2 people that did the shooting, and she is quite obsessed with them, basically. And we come to the final murderer, who is Violet, who is an ex-best friend of Joni. They find, like, we get a lot of their backstory of them 2 together. They were best friends, but Joni ends up being with the popular girls and ends up joining their group. Violet is quite isolated. She doesn't really have many in real life friends, and she spends a lot of time on the internet. She loves Tumblr, she loves Reddit, she loves like creepypastas. She spends a lot of time in those spheres, and it's a really interesting character. Actually, Violet is super interesting because she doesn't have as much to do in the murder as the other 2, allegedly. I think her character is really, really interesting just because how easy it is for teenagers who spend a lot of time on those sorts of websites, how easy it is to get into creepypastas and like finding all these horror stories and stuff like that. I think it's very, very easy. This book really encapsulates high school and teenagehood, especially like girl teenagehood, in such an incredible way. As someone who was in high school when technology was just starting to become rife, it's a very difficult time. There was a lot of like Ask FM, there was lots of stuff like that, and we were just horrible to each other. We were all horrible to each other. And she paints this high school life because she talks about the dynamics in the friendship group and why, you know, Joni was ended up being murdered and what Joni was like in the setting of these friendship groups. We find out that high school dynamic, and we find out basically how horrible they all were to each other, and that's it. High school is a hierarchy, and you just sort of have to, you know, you work your way to being mean to the top, sort of thing. I was getting anxious reading it, like it was very like, oh, this is a bit too close to home. Like high school is like, you either peaked in high school or it was the worst time of your entire life. Like, I do not trust people that say that they would go back to high school at all. Like, it could not be me, basically. It could not be me. Eliza Clark writes this so incredibly well, just how that these teenagers talk to each other, how that they respond to each other via being online and social media and cyberbullying, and a couple of them have Tumblr and they get death threats on Tumblr, and it's a very real situation. Even in my time, like when we had Ask FM, it was very common to get death threats from other people in school on Ask FM, but you didn't want to turn your, you know, anonymity off or your like Ask Me box, because you would also get the good things, and getting attention is great. So it was very, very well written. These bits, especially in the high school setting, were incredibly well written, and how the girls talked about each other and how the girls interacted was incredibly real. Throughout this book, we find out all that information, but we never really find out anything about Joni, which is what the whole book is about Joni's murder. We never find out anything true from Joni. The story was already untrustworthy, but we only find out what Joni was like and her character through the murderers and through the murderers' families. So we never get anything that feels like it could be true, and we don't have anyone that ever stands up for Joni's character, so we never learn anything substantial about Joni, even though the whole book is about her murder. It's such an upsetting part of the book, and this also goes into what the book is about as well, about the ethics of consuming true crime media. We don't know anything about Joni. She's dead. We don't get to hear her side of the story. We don't get to know anything, and we find she doesn't have any friends. She doesn't have any true friends that are there for her, and so we never really find anything out about Joni, and it's really heartbreaking to witness. We just know what we know through everybody else, and everybody else depicts her as this mean bitch, Regina George. Like, she's horrible, like this horrible person, but you know, we don't get anything else from anybody about her, and so it's very hard to digest that these are the people that talk about Joni, and we never really find anything else about her. One of the other topics of the book is the ethics of true crime consumerism, which has been something super interesting to me for a while now. This book is a critique on true crime itself and how we consume true crime as well. It talks about how true crime can dehumanize the victim and how we consume it, how people make whole careers of talking about dead people and how they were killed, and just around the ethics of true crime consumerism, which is really, really interesting. And again, I went to a Q&A with Eliza Clark, and this was quite a big conversation throughout the Q&A as well, which was really cool. She talks about how certain podcasts or YouTube videos don't really delve into anything but the crime itself, and they don't talk about the systems that create the crime. They don't talk about the backstory of the people. They don't talk about their upbringings. There is YouTube videos or there's podcasts, and they have people who do product placements or sponsorships right in the middle of talking about someone being killed, or they have or it feels performative, or they make shitty jokes at the expense of the people who are involved in this crime, and it just dehumanizes people overall, I think. and it was a really interesting conversation. Again, this is one that I've been interested in for a while, so it was really interesting to hear, and it's really interesting to read about as well. Alec Corelli hates these podcasts, he calls them fake, and he hates how they dehumanize, but by the end of the book we see that he's done the exact same thing that he's criticised these people for. There's so much stuff in this book that is so interesting and so gripping and so incredible, but I really enjoyed this conversation as well. I really enjoyed that as part of this book. Throughout this book, it deals with that, and it makes you feel guilty for consuming this book. Even though it's not a real crime, I feel guilty for consuming this book because I've been told that, hey, by the way, that someone has like falsely fabricated all this stuff, and I know that Alec isn't a real person. I know this is not a real crime, but oh my god, do I feel so guilty. When you read this, you will feel so guilty for reading this. I really think that Eliza Clark really achieved everything she set out to do with this book. This book is incredible. You get to know all these characters, and it's still like not knowing what to believe or not knowing what to take on, and it's really interesting. It's such an interesting feeling to have, and I've never felt this way reading a book before. I just think Eliza Clark did an incredible job with this book. I think it's incredibly interesting. I couldn't put it down for the life of me. It was absolutely incredible to read, and I think this may be one of the best books I have read of all time, but definitely one of the best books. It's in the running for best book of the year for me. This was absolutely incredible. If you get to read it, I hope you enjoy it, but if you have read it already and you want to tell me your opinions, tell me down below because I'm interested to know. Like I said, this is, everyone that I know who has read it have all said that it's one of the best books that they have read so far this year, or it's been one of their favourite books of all time. But this is Eliza Clark's second book, and Boy Parts is also incredible. If you ever get the chance to read Boy Parts, it's a little bit shorter, and I think this was really popular on TikTok for some like ages ago. I think this came out in 2018. So if you've read Boy Parts, you will love Penance. But go and check out Eliza Clark's work, it's all really incredible. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I shall see you all next time. Bye.